He was just a student when war broke out, but he became one of the Japanese occupation's most wanted resistance leaders. After the fall of the Philippines in 1942, Eleuterio Terry Adavoso co-founded the Hunters ROTC guerrillas, transforming former ROTC cadets into one of the country's most effective resistance forces. His fighters carried out ambushes, sabotaged Japanese supply lines, and gathered intelligence on enemy troop movements across Luzon. The Hunters also rescued downed Allied airmen, protected civilians, and transmitted critical military information to General Douglas MacArthur's headquarters. Their intelligence and combat operations weakened Japanese defenses and helped prepare for the Allied liberation of the Philippines in 1945. During World War II, Jorge B. Vargas became one of the highest-ranking Filipino officials under the Japanese occupation. As head of the Executive Commission, he oversaw the day-to-day administration of the country, helping keep government services, hospitals, and public institutions operating during one of the Philippines' darkest periods. Vargas also negotiated with Japanese authorities on issues affecting Filipino civilians, hoping to reduce suffering under military rule. However, because he served in the occupation government, his wartime role has remained the subject of historical debate. Some view his action. He began the war as a young soldier, but helped keep the resistance alive until liberation. When World War II reached the Philippines, Rafael Ileto joined the fight as an officer of the Philippine Army. After the fall of Bataan and Corregidor, he refused to accept defeat and became part of the guerrilla resistance against the Japanese occupation. Working with Allied forces, Ileto helped organize guerrilla operations, coordinated resistance units, and gathered intelligence on Japanese troop movements and military installations. The information collected by these networks supported General Douglas MacArthur's campaign to liberate the Philippines by identifying enemy positions and strengthening coordination between guerrillas and Allied forces. After the war, Ileto applied the lessons he learned in guerrilla warfare to help develop the Philippine Scout Rangers, creating one of the country's premier special operations units. He was among the first Filipino pilots to face the Japanese invasion and paid the ultimate price in the skies. When Japan launched its invasion of the Philippines in December 1941, Lieutenant Cesar Basa flew combat missions with the Philippine Army Air Corps to defend the country. Despite being outnumbered and flying aircraft that were no match for Japan's more advanced fighters, he took to the air to challenge the invading force. During one mission over central Luzon, Basa engaged enemy aircraft while protecting Allied positions. His plane was hit in combat, and he was killed in action, becoming one of the first Filipino military aviators to give his life in World War II. His sacrifice reflected the determination of Filipino airmen who continued fighting even when victory seemed impossible. When the Japanese occupied the Philippines, one young politician traded the courtroom for the battlefield. After Japan invaded the Philippines in 1941, Wenceslao Vinzons organized one of the earliest guerrilla resistance groups in Camarines Norte. He recruited local volunteers, armed civilians, and launched surprise attacks against Japanese patrols to disrupt their control of the province. His fighters also protected local communities, gathered intelligence on enemy movements, and kept communication lines open with other resistance groups. These early guerrilla operations prevented the Japanese from fully securing the region and inspired more Filipinos to join the growing resistance across the country. In 1942, Vinzons was captured by the Japanese. Despite being pressured to cooperate, he refused. He was executed, but the resistance movement he helped build continued the fight until the Philippines was liberated. One Filipino general didn't win the war, but his leadership bought precious time that changed the course of the battle. When Japan invaded the Philippines in 1941, Brigadier General Mateo Capinpin commanded Filipino troops during the desperate defense of Luzon. As enemy forces advanced, he helped lead the organized withdrawal into the Bataan Peninsula, allowing thousands of Filipino and American soldiers to establish defensive positions. His troops fought a series of delaying actions against the advancing Japanese army, slowing its advance and strengthening the Allied defense of Bataan. That determined stand held for more than 3 months, despite severe shortages of food, medicine, and ammunition. General Mateo Capinpin proved that sometimes the greatest victory isn't defeating the enemy. It's buying the time needed for others to keep the fight alive. He first fought the Japanese in the skies. Then he risked everything by returning to the Philippines as a secret agent. When Japan invaded the Philippines in 1941, Lieutenant Jesus Villamor flew fighter missions against the invading Japanese Air Force. Despite flying outdated aircraft and facing overwhelming numbers, he successfully engaged enemy planes and became one of the Philippines' first air heroes. After the fall of the Philippines, Villamor volunteered for an even more dangerous mission. Working with the Allied Intelligence Bureau, he secretly re-entered Japanese-occupied territory by submarine and helped organize guerrilla networks across the islands. His teams gathered vital intelligence on Japanese troop movements, airfields, supply depots, and coastal defenses. That information was sent to General Douglas MacArthur's headquarters and helped Allied commanders plan bombing missions and prepare for the liberation of the Philippines. One Filipino leader liberated an entire province before the enemy even realized it was slipping away. During the Philippine Revolution, Martin Teofilo Delgado led revolutionary forces across Iloilo and the Visayas against Spanish colonial rule. In 1898, he organized coordinated attacks that forced Spanish troops to surrender, making Iloilo one of the first major provinces in the Visayas to break free from Spanish control. When the Philippine-American War began, Delgado once again took up arms, leading Filipino forces against advancing American troops. His fighters used their knowledge of the local terrain to slow enemy advances and continue resisting even after many organized armies had been defeated. Martin Teofilo Delgado's leadership helped secure the Visayas for the Filipino revolutionary movement and inspired continued resistance in the fight for independence. When the Philippines fell to Japanese forces, one Filipino commander refused to let the fight end. During World War II, Mariano Castañeda helped organize and lead resistance efforts after the Japanese occupation of the Philippines. As a senior officer of the Philippine Constabulary, he coordinated guerrilla units, maintained communication between resistance groups, and supported Allied operations with intelligence on Japanese troop movements and military activities. His leadership helped keep organized resistance alive in areas under enemy control, allowing Filipino guerrillas to continue disrupting Japanese operations until Allied forces returned to liberate the country. For his courage and outstanding leadership during the war, Castañeda was later awarded the Medal of Valor, the Philippines' highest military honor for gallantry. He led one of the most daring rescue missions of World War II, but never lived to see its success. During World War II, Manuel Colayco served with the USAFFE and later the Allied Intelligence Bureau, helping coordinate intelligence with Filipino guerrilla forces fighting behind Japanese lines. The information he helped gather on enemy positions and troop movements supported Allied operations as they prepared to retake Manila. On February 3, 1945, Colayco joined the mission to liberate more than 3,000 civilian internees held by Japanese forces at the University of Santo Tomas. He was among the first Allied officers to enter the campus, helping secure the area so the prisoners could be rescued. During the operation, Colayco was struck by enemy fire and suffered fatal wounds, becoming one of the first Allied officers to lose his life during the liberation of Manila. Manuel Colayco gave his life to help free thousands of innocent civilians, turning one rescue mission into a lasting symbol of courage and sacrifice. When the Philippines fell, one American officer refused to surrender and built an army behind enemy lines. After the Japanese occupied Mindanao in 1942, Colonel Wendell Fertig organized thousands of Filipino and American guerrillas into a disciplined resistance force. Instead of launching reckless attacks, he established a functioning military command, complete with supply networks, communications, and intelligence operations across the island. Fertig's guerrillas gathered detailed information on Japanese troop movements, airfields, coastal defenses, and shipping routes. The intelligence was secretly transmitted to General Douglas MacArthur's headquarters, helping Allied commanders plan airstrikes and the eventual liberation of the southern Philippines. By the time American forces returned in 1945, much of Mindanao's interior was already under guerrilla control, allowing Allied troops to advance more quickly against Japanese forces. Before General MacArthur fulfilled his promise to return, one Filipino commander was already preparing Leyte for liberation. After the Japanese occupied Leyte during World War II, Colonel Ruperto Canglian organized the Leyte guerrilla forces, uniting scattered resistance groups into a coordinated fighting force. His men launched raids on Japanese outposts, disrupted enemy supply lines, and secretly gathered intelligence on troop positions, coastal defenses, and military installations. Canglian's guerrillas transmitted this information to General Douglas MacArthur's headquarters, helping Allied planners prepare for the Leyte landings in October 1944. When American forces finally arrived, many of the island's resistance fighters guided Allied troops, secured key routes, and joined the campaign to drive Japanese forces from Leyte. Ruperto Canglian's leadership helped ensure that when liberation came to Leyte, the Allies weren't fighting alone. They were joined by Filipinos who had never stopped resisting. The Japanese controlled Manila, but one guerrilla commander made sure they were never truly in control. During World War II, Marcos Agustin, better known by his nom de guerre marking, organized one of the largest guerrilla forces on Luzon. Operating from the mountains east of Manila, his fighters carried out ambushes, destroyed bridges and supply routes, and attacked Japanese patrols to disrupt enemy operations. Marking's men also gathered detailed intelligence on Japanese troop movements, ammunition depots, and defensive positions. The information was passed to Allied commanders and helped plan military operations during the liberation of Luzon in 1945. When American forces returned, Marking's guerrillas fought alongside them, guiding troops through difficult terrain, securing strategic locations, and helping drive Japanese forces out of central Luzon. Marking proved that even under occupation, a determined resistance could weaken an enemy from within and help pave the way to liberation. She was a schoolteacher before the war, but became one of the Philippines' most feared guerrilla commanders. After the Japanese occupied Leyte during World War II, Nieves Fernandez organized and led a guerrilla force made up of local farmers, fishermen, and former soldiers. She trained her fighters in ambush tactics, sabotage, and jungle survival, turning ordinary civilians into an effective resistance unit. Her guerrillas repeatedly attacked Japanese patrols, disrupted enemy supply routes, and gathered intelligence on troop movements. The information they provided was passed to Allied forces and helped prepare for General Douglas MacArthur's return to Leyte in 1944. Despite constant danger, Fernandez continued leading operations throughout the occupation, becoming one of the few women to command a large guerrilla force during the war. Nieves Fernandez proved that courage has no rank, no uniform, and no gender. It can change the course of history. One Filipino guerrilla commander helped save more than 500 prisoners of war without firing the first shot. In January 1945, Captain Juan Pajota played a crucial role in the raid at Cabanatuan, one of the most daring rescue missions of World War II. Working alongside U.S. Army Rangers and Filipino guerrillas, Pajota used his knowledge of the local terrain to plan the attack and position his men to block Japanese reinforcements. As the Rangers stormed the prison camp, Pajota's guerrillas defended a key bridge and held off enemy troops, preventing them from reaching the camp. Their stand gave the rescue force enough time to evacuate more than 500 Allied prisoners of war safely. For his leadership and bravery, Juan Pajota was awarded the Bronze Star Medal. Without Juan Pajota and his guerrillas, one of the greatest rescue missions of World War II might never have succeeded. He led the last mounted cavalry charge in U.S. Army history, then spent 3 years fighting the enemy from the shadows. When Japan invaded the Philippines in January 1942, Lieutenant Edwin Price Ramsey led a daring horse-mounted cavalry charge at Morong, Bataan, forcing advancing Japanese troops to retreat. It became the last successful mounted cavalry charge in U.S. Army history. After Bataan fell, Ramsey escaped capture and organized thousands of Filipino guerrillas in central Luzon. His resistance fighters sabotaged Japanese supply lines, ambushed enemy patrols, and gathered intelligence on troop movements, bridges, and military installations. The information Ramsey's guerrillas transmitted to General Douglas MacArthur's headquarters helped Allied planners prepare for the liberation of Luzon in 1945. When American forces returned, his guerrillas joined them in driving Japanese forces from the region.